Welcome everyone, my name is Tamás Faragó, and in the following minutes let me show you our first results about dogs' reactions to vocal emotion expressions. Well, what are these emotion expressions at all? During communication there is a signaler and a receiver, and the signaler shows certain behaviors during interaction. Some of these behaviors have the capacity to show the inner state of the signaler. In this case, these signals can be considered as emotional expressions, and these have a function to change the receiver's behavior during the interaction in an adaptive way. This can work actually only if the receiver is able to decode the emotion encoded in the signal. But how this encoding can work? In vocal communication, recent studies showed that there are simple acoustic rules of this encoding. Two main dimensions were found to be encoded in signals: the emotional valence, whether the signaler is in a positive or a negative inner state, and the intensity, which shows the arousal level of the signaler. In vocalizations, this emotional valence mainly encoded in the call length, while intensity is mainly encoded in the pitch, the fundamental frequency. But there's a third dimension, the so-called social valence, which is actually showing what would be the adaptive reaction of the receiver hearing the signal. This can be positive or negative. In some cases, this social valence and the emotional valence might be in conflict. When in agonistic situations, the inner state of the signaler is certainly negative. Their vocalizations and the signals also has a negative social valence, meaning that the adaptive response from the other individual would be an avoidance. But in case of distress calls, the caller is also in a negative inner state, while their vocalizations have a positive social valence, meaning that their function is to evoke approach from the social partners. In our study, we were curious from these two dimensions which one will affect the reactions of dogs towards these vocalizations. In earlier studies, we found that food guarding growls indeed evoke withdrawal reaction from the dogs, but in case of distress calls, we don't know whether they evoke an approach or a withdrawal. So to test this, we collected vocalizations of dogs, adult dogs, in three different contexts, having three different kind of emotional load. In case of the positive sounds, we have playful and comfort vocalizations, which have both positive emotional valence, and we expect a positive social valence also, meaning that these will evoke mainly approach reactions from others. Let me show some examples. So these are playful grunts. In case of the agonistic emotional context, we used food guarding growls, which has both a negative emotional valence and a negative social valence, expected to evoke a withdrawal reaction. And finally, for showing distress vocalizations, we collected separation whines of the dogs. In this case, the emotional valence is negative, while the social valence is positive. Thus, hearing these whines, if the dogs react to the emotional valence, we expect a withdrawal, while if they react more to the social valence, we expect an approach reaction. We put together 60-second long sequences of each of these emotional calls in random order, and we tested the behavioral reactions of 52 adult dogs. The protocol was based on our earlier study. In the lab, there was a food mat with hidden food pieces and a covered box with the hidden speakers in them. The owner and the dog entered the room, they walked around. The owner let the dog to sniff the food pieces, and then let the dog to approach the mat and eat the food pieces. With this, we ensured that the dogs learned that there's food on this mat. In the test phase, the owner and the dog entered the room, but this time they stopped at the door, and after a while the owner led the dog to approach the food mat. there were no food pieces now, but we immediately start to play back the sound when the dog touched the mat. So we coded the behavior during the 1 minute playback, and we were mainly curious about the initial reactions of the dogs, whether it is an approach or an avoidance. I show you some examples. So we coded approach reaction when the dog moves from the starting position towards the sound source, while an avoidance if the dogs moved away from the starting position. We coded several other behaviors too, but now I will show only results about the initial reactions. And what we found is, in case of the initial reactions, most of the dogs in the distress and the play group reacted with an approach towards the playback, while in the agonistic situation, most of the dogs showed a withdrawal reaction, and this significantly differed across the three groups. We found that there was a significant difference in the latency of approaching the sound source. The fastest approach was measured in the distress group, and the dogs heard the separation whine, but this was not different from the latency shown in case of the play or the positive vocalizations, while both these two significantly differed from the approach latency in case of agonistic vocalization playbacks. When we compare the withdrawal reactions latency, we see that the fastest reaction was in case of the agonistic vocalizations, but there was only a trend-like difference between the distress and the agonistic playbacks. As the dogs showed a clear approach reaction towards the separation whines, we can conclude that the reaction was mainly affected by the social valence of the calls and not the emotional valence of the callers. In case of agonistic calls, it is interesting that although more dogs showed a withdrawal reaction and avoided the sound source, some of the dogs showed actually an approach reaction. This might be due to individual differences, for example, in their personality traits, but this needs further testing. And with that, I would like to thank for your attention, and I'm happy to answer your questions